can we draw the Arc de Triomphe in just 10 minutes? Look, I think there's two ways you could see this as a 10-minute drawing exercise. The first, and I think this would be helpful for everyone, is to simply be aiming to get the proportions of the structure correct. The relationship between the height, the width, the difference in width between the left hand support and the right hand side, where because of foreshortening as the arch moves away from us from right to left, it narrows. And also to get the major divisions correct in proportion. So for instance, those cornices above the major sculptures on the front and the rectangular medallion that sits above it, full of low relief sculptures, to get those proportions correct, to get them more correct than what I've just drawn here, because clearly I haven't got this wide enough. I've made it too narrow, this support, and it's going to throw me out now for everything that I do. I possibly should have started by drawing the square medallion in proportion and then build the arch around it. But anyway, despite the fact that I was a bit unhappy about this at the start, I thought it was still best to persevere, and I was still hoping to get the rest of the arch in a better proportion. In some ways, I perhaps got a bit distracted by the decoration. And because I got the proportion wrong on this box to the left of the archway, I therefore now get the proportions of the arch wrong because it's going up too high. But it goes up to basically the top of the medallion on the left, square medallion, but because my medallion goes up too high for the width, my arch does as well, which makes the arch too wide. I've also not done a very good job with the foreshortening of the arch at all. So now this space is now too wide, next to a space that's next to a width of the left-hand support that's too narrow. So this is a great one for you to do better than I managed to do. I have no doubt that if I were to do it again, it would be more accurate. But I like the idea of leaving things when they don't quite work out, because dealing with things that don't quite work out, whether it's to either transform it during the drawing process in some way that we can sort out, or whether it's just to come to terms with it, I think is an important part of learning to draw. And we certainly don't want to be precious in drawings that we're doing as daily practice. It's important to think of these as practice, because then we can develop our confidence and the briskness of our lines. Because if we always draw our lines very slowly and in a very laboured way, we'll never learn what it feels like to draw a nice, smooth, crisp line. The way you see perhaps other people draw them and think, I wish I could do that. It's not so much skill as confidence. So I get these two lamps in place because I obviously can't draw what's behind them until the lamps are in place. And these are also these two lamps in perspective to each other. They follow a perspective pattern because the second one is further away from us than the first one. Now, I don't get those top horizontal lines quite angled up enough, particularly the lower one of the two top lines. And that really messes things up towards the end when I go to add the upper part on and I suddenly want to lift the angle too high for what looks consistent with these two lines. I do try to massage them slightly up at one point, but I don't know how successful that is. If you look at what the gap from the left-hand support to the right-hand support, where we look through the arch, it's very clear now, but not at the time, that I've drawn this far too wide. And again, that's because I took the arch up too high. So the wall that slopes away from us inside the arch is too wide. And then the gap of, if you like, sky that we can see between where that wall ends and the right-hand side of the arch begins is too wide as well. So I'm going to have problems with the other side of the arch. And I did. That's why I say this could be a good exercise just to work on getting the proportions correct and not worrying about the decoration at all. If you really think the decoration is a bit beyond you, then it's still very worthwhile to do just the basic proportion shapes. And look, if you're finding this interesting and helpful, please, why don't you hit the like button right now for me, because that will certainly help me out. Part of the problem I had was that I was sure that this was meant to fit on the page and have a certain space between the end of the drawing and the edge of the page. And I was somehow trying to make that work. And because I didn't realize I'd gone across too wide in the center of the arch, I didn't realize I was now too far across, and therefore I had to go much closer to the edge of the paper if I were going to get this arch more in proportion. And so you can see that I've actually drawn the right hand upright almost the same width as the left hand one. And yet if we look at the reference photo, we can see that the right hand one is clearly taller and clearly wider. Now, can I just say, this might sound like an excuse, but it is actually true. That line on the extreme right hand side, the vertical line that looks like it's wildly sloping inwards, in my drawing, it's just fine. It does actually go straight down, as does the vertical lines to the left of it. My camera wasn't quite angled parallel to the plane of the paper, and so it has distorted at the extremes, which was in this location particularly, unfortunately. And if you saw my last video, the palace, on the outskirts of Paris, the same thing happened there because I did these two drawings one after the other. Now, if you want to have a go at the decoration, this is an absolute perfect example of drawing the effect of the detail, not drawing the detail. These are lots of little figures, but I am not trying to draw figures. What I'm doing is I'm looking at the major shapes that draw the eye. What could be long rectangles or very long kind of thin triangular shapes, curves, arches, the angles at which various shapes or gathered lines cross or connect. These are all the things that, if I can capture these things, will create the effect of figures without actually having to draw them. Because we want these figures to sit back and for the brain just to know that they're figures without actually looking hard to see that they're figures. Now, I've put very light hatching over this decoration here because that's the effect we get with the photo in life. It's not that it's really darker, it's exactly the same stone, but because of all the edges that cast shadows, it puts a lot of darker areas, darker values over this section, and that does create a bit of a darker effect overall. So we want to draw the effect of that with these loose hatching lines. We don't want to make it too dark because that would then draw the eye too much. And even more the case with this one that sits behind this smaller lamppost. Really want to just suggest what's happening. So we have more figures to suggest up here. I'm starting to realize that my proportions are not at all good. Often it's when we subdivide a space we've already created that we can really see that the proportions aren't correct. So that's what's happening here. I simply can't draw the shape on the reference in this space. And it's almost like an optical illusion that whatever's inside the space is, whatever size or proportion it is, it does in some way impact the way we see the larger space and can really mislead us into the relationship between height and breadth, for instance. So now I'm trying to get this top section on, and you can see that there's far too different an angle between that line and the one below it. It's too much like a thick wedge rather than a subtle increase of angle. Now, up till now, you've been watching all of this in real time, and in a moment, we're going to switch to double time because the 10 minutes is up. but I still wanted to add some decorative elements just as way of demo. But as I said, if you want to just draw this for practice at the proportions, it's actually a great subject for that. Maybe I should have done this in 2 videos. I'm not worried too much about hatching because there just isn't time. But this is the 10 minutes up. So now we're in double time. Although I don't have a great deal of the actual arch, there are these 2 figures here that I think are some sort of mythological Greek goddesses of some sort, or heralds or something, with trumpets, I dare say, proclaiming the victories of Napoleon. And now we have a very long and very detailed relief that runs right the way around the top. Again, I'm just wanting to suggest with some marks that these are figures, lots of figures all lined up in a long horizontal row with a few horses. I don't want to certainly try to draw bodies and arms and legs. So it's trying just to see the effect, the overall visual effect, what stands out, and then copying that ourselves. So now we have these structures, decorative elements along the front that actually represent the ends of beams when Greek temples were built with wooden roofs. And once they began to use stone for all of this, they retained in a stylized way the appearance of the timber roofing. And there's the decorative little round sections on top that each sit above one of these rectangular pseudo beam ends. And then just down the side, a little bit of tree. I like these trees that poke their way into a scene. And that's absolutely all I've got time for. Well, what do you think? Not my best work, but a great one that I learnt from, and I hope that by explaining where it isn't working, you can see that, and that will perhaps help you to perceive what you're drawing more clearly, more accurately, and draw, therefore, more accurately. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. Despite the fact that lots of things I'm unhappy about this, it was still a fun experience, and it was a learning experience, which is the object of doing these. So I hope you give it a go, and of course the reference will be on my channel community page. So why not add this to your 10 or 15 or 20-minute daily drawings? But look, whatever you draw, however you draw it, and certainly however it turns out, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next video. Bye.